as I get to the entry door, I literally have to step over this blood pool that's forming, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is serious.
Listen up, gang. Lucky Gunner has both fantastic content and great prices on ammo. Enjoy the convenience of online purchase and crazy, super fast shipping. Experience why Lucky Gunner is one of our favorite spots on the Gunternet. Get-asp.com/Lucky Gunner. And while you're there, you'll find MagTech ammunition. MagTech is the exclusive range ammo for the Active Self-Protection team, and we are grateful for their commitment to quality and support. You can buy MagTech ammo at the Lucky Gunner link. Remember to tell them that you heard about them on the ASP podcast. Alrighty, gang. Welcome back to the Active Self-Protection podcast. Once again, I am your host, Mike Wooliver, and I am your favorite former Fed. With us today, a gentleman who reached out to me on email and said, hey, I don't know if this story is worth telling, but here it is. And sure enough, it's worth telling, which is why he's here. His name is Abraham, and he is from Pueblo, Colorado. Abraham, welcome. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Mike. I always appreciate watching your videos.
I appreciate that. Hey, if it weren't for you watching and listening, I'd have to go do a real job. So thank you for doing that. So you told me before we started, you are a certified inpatient pharmacy tech. I don't know that I know what that means. Tell me what that means exactly. What do you do?
Basically, I handle, compound, dispense, and make medications specifically for patients who are admitted in the hospital. So no outpatient type of communication in that aspect. Simply just strictly hospital.
Gotcha.
So,
okay.
Yeah, it's pretty nice.
Yeah, it sounds like a pretty good job. So talk to us before we talk about your incident. As you know, I like to learn as much as I can in real time along with the audience about what happened. So before we get into that, why don't we start with your self-defense background? If you watch active self-protection videos, most people who do are at least cognizant and aware of self-defense issues. So had you done any sort of training, any sort of firearms training, martial arts, anything like that prior to your incident?
Well, I do have a little bit. I have about I can't really gauge years or time. I have an orange belt in Kempo karate,
Okay.
so it's maybe a year or so. But I surprisingly have retained a lot of knowledge regarding that. It was very fun. Wish I can get into it again once I find the time. As far as like firearms, I really didn't get into firearms until like my early 30s. I'm 40 right now.
It's never too late.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it was about that time where I started watching active self-protection regularly. And from that point on, I just kind of started doing a little bit every day to try and be, how do you say, just a little more proficient over time. I got me a Mantis X10
Nice.
and used it for dry fire practice. I try to actually go out to the range twice a month at least, just to kind of get the physical practice in. And other than that, my first aid skills don't really have any certifiable criteria other than like required training I need to learn as a hospital worker. So, but that's about it as far as I could say.
Yeah, and that may not sound like a lot to you, Abraham, but that's probably a lot more than the vast majority of people do. Even people considering their own self-defense don't get out to the range that often, probably, and don't have any martial arts. So, well done for that, and I hope you continue your training into the future. So your incident happened about how long ago?
August 13th, and that was this year, or
okay, 2022, yeah, last year.
yeah. I remember it because it was the second of a 4-day weekend, conveniently, and plus the reason the date is fresh in my mind is not too long ago, I ended up getting the police report for the incident, mainly to get reimbursed for the tourniquet I used. I know that Dark Angel Medical has like a kit for life policy. If you use any of their things for life-saving incident, they replace it for free, which is pretty nice. But not here to plug in an advertisement. So
no, all good. All good. So you apply to tourniquet. That's what we call foreshadowing, ladies and gentlemen. So you have a little glimpse. It'll keep you interested and keep you listening. So this incident happened where you live. I've told the story, I think, before on the show, about there being a domestic violence incident, the apartment right beneath mine. And I was a young federal agent and really wanted to get this young lady help, but didn't want to get directly involved if I could avoid it. And as it turns out, I couldn't help but get directly involved. It's something you have to consider carefully, because the people you're interacting with, for good or ill, are potentially going to remain your neighbors. So it's something you got to consider before you jump in is, do I want to get involved in something where I'm going to have to see this person potentially every day until I move? So just walk us through that day. What time of day was it? And talk to us about what you heard and saw.
Okay, starting from the beginning. I was in the process of actually setting up a doorbell camera and a little security system that I got. And below me, my neighbors, male and female, they were arguing, and I can hear them, and it wasn't uncommon. I mean, it happens a few times a month, and
Right.
Nothing's really. It doesn't stand out to me too much. I'm just like, okay, yep, they're fighting again. So, it seemed like a pretty typical evening. It was about 10 o'clock or so.
Mm-hmm.
And then something strange happened. Like I could literally hear them running from the bedroom, because I live in an upper level of a duplex, and the apartment layout is basically the same.
Mm-hmm.
And I could literally hear them run, and I was like, well, that's weird. Like, is she chasing him out of the apartment again? Because she's done that before.
Right.
Yeah, and usually it ends up as an argument outside. So of course, being the curious and kind of nosy person I am,
Mm-hmm.
I was like to just sneak a peek out my windows just to make sure things aren't getting too crazy, or at the very least some mild entertainment. I know it sounds terrible, but
Yeah.
that's why I spectate other people's drama, because I don't like any of my own.
Sure.
But as I was looking out and trying to listen, I hear my neighbor, and she is yelling, but not in a like an argumentative way, like they were fighting
Mm-hmm.
earlier, but it was more of like an urgency. I could see. And by the way, her daughter's boyfriend, and her mom have been outside this whole time. I'm guessing maybe waiting for things to calm down between the two. And I could see her daughter on the phone, and I'm like, okay, I think I need to take a closer look here. I open up my apartment door, and it looks outside into an entryway. My entrance goes down the stairwell. Her goes up the stairwell, meets in the middle, and there's that main entrance.
Right.
And I could see her daughter's boyfriend, shirtless, leaning over somebody. I have no idea who is sitting there or what. I take a look, and I notice it's my neighbor, not my neighbor's boyfriend, but my neighbor. She's sitting down. And at this point, I'm like, what's going on? I actually audibly say it. I don't get a response. And then shortly after that, I can actually see a pool of blood starting to form on the concrete steps that she's sitting on. So then I just straight out ask, was like, do you need a tourniquet? And then that's when I finally get a response. She's like, yes, if you have one, please. And I'm like, okay, I'm doing this. I'm getting involved.
Right. So real quick, was she that sort of matter of fact about it, or was she agitated?
She was very matter of fact. The little bit I know is that she does work in the health field also. So I imagine she has some knowledge of the seriousness of her condition.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, I just offered to help. Okay, I got to do this. And it's strange because, and there was a podcast episode that just aired not too long ago. I think he mentioned about how time kind of slows down when you're kind of going through that. And it's almost like what happened to me. The first thing I thought about was what the acronym John always talks about. in his videos, tap ifs.
Right.
I was like, okay, well, I want to help my neighbor, but I don't know if this assailant is out there. I mean, obviously she was attacked. It didn't look like there was uh, like an accident or something.
Right.
And so I was like, okay, uh, I need to make sure there's no threat out there because if I'm going to help, I got to be sure that I'm safe as well. Otherwise, I'm not. I'm going to be contributing to an emergency instead.
Right. That's actually well put, because I think it's just like anything else. If you rolled up on an accident scene, you would do your best to make sure there aren't cars speeding towards you, or the car wasn't about to catch on fire. Before you could administer aid, you have to make the scene as safe as you can. You're not the police, but still, good thinking to not just rush down there and disregard the idea that you could be attacked possibly for helping out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for all I know, that dude's like just hovering out there, and I'm like, okay, well, I got to make sure the area is safe. So, both by proximity and functionality, I reach for my AR-15. Uh, and by practicality, I meant the only reason I got it was not only was it because it was near me, but because it had a light on it. I haven't got a pistol mounted light, but as far as like being a private citizen, I feel like I don't really need one.
Mm-hmm.
but, but yeah, my rifle had one, so I was like, okay, well here I go. I turn on my light, I chamber around, and you know, I'm just making sure that as I'm going down these stairs, there's nobody waiting for me or ready to do her further harm.
Now, at this point, do you have any indication as to how she received this injury? You didn't hear any shots or hear any screaming or whatever. Like, you really don't know why it is she's bleeding so badly?
Correct. I did not hear any shots. I didn't hear any kind of screams, other than what I think was yelling when they were running out the door.
Right, but they've been arguing, so it's reasonable to assume that somebody was assaulted rather than it was some sort of accident where a piece of glass cut her in the leg.
Oh yeah.
Okay,
That's definitely my train of thought when I was walking by.
gotcha.
I As I get to the entry door, I literally have to step over this blood pool that's forming, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is serious. So I'm making my way to my vehicle. I do have my IFAC trauma kit in the trunk of my car. Now, the reason it's in the trunk of my car is because the day before, me and my younger brother Aaron had a gone shooting, and I just hadn't taken the time to unload everything yet. So,
Right.
um, so there's no supposed perp in sight. I get to my car and get my trauma kit out, and I'm able to make my way back to my neighbor. And I apply a tourniquet. It's a combat application tourniquet.
Mm-hmm.
Her daughter's boyfriend was holding the wound, so I opened the tourniquet to wrap it around the limb so that he didn't have to relieve any pressure.
And give us again the location of the wound, and could you see the wound, or was she wearing pants covering it, or what was that situation?
The wound was on her left arm.
Okay.
And it was kind of towards the center of her forearm, but maybe a little bit closer towards the wrist.
Okay. Bleeding pretty good.
Yeah. And after the fact, I learned that her radial artery was severed.
Oh boy.
Completely. Yeah. So I know the rule is high and tight, roughly.
Yeah.
I do apply the tourniquet, but I do it on the high part of her forearm. I know some people might think that maybe I should have went to the lower part of the upper arm, like below the bicep. But it's kind of I hear different things. All I know is I felt confident enough to apply a tourniquet, and I hope I made the situation a little better at that point.
Yeah, the way I was trained was high. We could call it a high or die. So if it's on the arm, I'm putting that tourniquet all the way up under the armpit. Just the way I was trained. I'm not an expert. I don't claim to know more than the average person about tourniquet application, but I think the point is, once you've applied it, if it stops bleeding, then good to go. Either way.
Yeah, for sure. We do computer learning as part of our employment training regularly, not just once at orientation, but like throughout the year,
right?
Just to kind of stay, in practice. And that was, I do remember high and tight was like the rule of thumb that they would always display in those lessons that we did. So that was the first thing I jumped to. I'm like, okay,
Now,
so
before we continue, have you ever had any practical exercise type training with a tourniquet where you've actually applied a training tourniquet to someone?
no, I have
Okay.
not.
I think it's
Yeah,
relevant. Okay. Interesting.
yeah. I seen I had watched like several videos. I know like Active Self Protection has had a couple of videos, not to mention the little training videos at work on how to apply tourniquets. So, I mean, I in no way am I saying that replaces actual practice, but as I said, like I felt confident that I could apply it correctly and help this person.
Yeah, and I think if you hand the average person a tourniquet and say put this on somewhat effectively, I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think that maybe if they had a belt or something they could try to do it, but I don't think the average person would be able to just intuitively figure out how a tourniquet works. I don't think it's intuitive. So the fact that you had at least the mental reps in and the visual training enabled you to do what you did.
Yeah, and I like to believe that did help out and contributed to my ability to act. I think part of the reason I even decided to get involved was that I kind of knew what to do. Like,
Right.
being a guy, I saw a problem. I was like, I can fix this.
Right.
So, but anyways, yeah. So I get the tourniquet applied, put it on there. Of course, when I put it on, I get the slack tightened, and of course, her first instinct is to moan in pain.
Yeah, it
She,
hurts.
she yeah, she was like, "Ow!" I was like, "Yeah, I know it's gonna hurt." And then at that point, I asked her, I was like, "Well, okay, what happened?" And by the way, yes, I put my rifle onto the side because I don't have a sling. And if I did have a sling and wasn't wearing it, I know John would be upset.
Yes. Good to know.
Yeah. So yeah, I have my rifle on the side, and after I play it, I asked her what happened. Um, the story she tells me is that her and her boyfriend were arguing, and some person just trespassed into their apartment. I'm like, okay.
Hmm.
Apparently, she chased this person out along with her boyfriend. Her boyfriend was chasing after this guy. Um,
That makes zero sense, but go ahead.
yeah. Um, not before this intruder uh, took a swing at her with what was either a knife or a box cutter. Obviously, it was a pretty sharp instrument. This guy runs off. Her boyfriend chases after him,
What a hero.
and yeah, and yeah, she's left there almost bleeding to death, and literally in front of her family. And I'm like, okay, so I guess maybe I could do something. As far as the direct incident and my experience that night, that's kind of about where it ends, other than, police finally arrive. And yes, I don't have my gun on me
Right.
or holding it when they arrive because, I know that's just a recipe for disaster should they mistake me for an assailant. Um, yeah, he asks like, "Oh, whose rifle is this?" Like, "Oh, that's mine."
Hmm.
And I'm guessing it's procedure. Like, he picks it up, removes the magazine, unchambers the round,
Right.
hands it back to me. He's like, "All right, there you go." And I can understand, safety of the scene. I get it, no problem. And EMS finally arrives. Um, at that point, I'm like, okay, they're wheeling her off. Guess I go back to doing what I was doing, and that's about it.
So let's talk really quick about when the police arrive. I think it's important, especially because as you said, you had a firearm with you, not on you, but with you. Um, did you know for a fact someone had called the police as all this is going on, or did you call them, or how did that happen?
Oh yeah, no. I believe uh, when it first happened, her daughter was on the phone with police, and I think it was her mom also that was on the phone with dispatch. I remember them trying to zero in on the location of the emergency. Of course, her mom, she was getting upset, thinking it was like, okay, you guys don't know where you are. My daughter's bleeding to death, and I can understand her panic, but at the same time, I'm like, this isn't helping. Just let's all just focus on what needs to be done.
Yeah,
But
we,
yeah,
we
yeah.
we say all the time that calm is a superpower, and I really mean it when I say that. If you're a self defender, and you're responding to your own need for defense or someone else's or a medical emergency, remaining
Mhm.
calm is critical. But sometimes that means remaining calm in the face of other people who are decidedly not calm. But that's okay, as long as you're the one with a level head. All that crazy stuff can be going on around you, and you can keep a level head and do what needs to be done. It sounds like that's what you did. Um, so I know the audience is dying to know. Uh, did we ever figure out who this random stranger was who ran into her apartment, cut her, and ran back out again?
Short answer, no.
Okay.
But according to the police report, her boyfriend's listed as potential suspect.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Uh,
Very likely.
yeah, and of course, this person's still hanging around, and nothing ever really became of the investigation after that. Yeah, needless to say, he disappeared for a little while, never visited her in the hospital after the incident, and then all of a sudden he was back. I'm like, okay.
It's one of those mysteries of life.
Mhm.
Why people in abusive relationships, A, stay in them, and B, defend and try to protect the person who's beating them on a regular basis. My neighbor incident that happened, this is back in San Diego, back in the late '90s. They fought constantly, and I don't know if that's a learned behavior or something you grew up around, so it becomes sort of normal, to have these constant fights and arguments. But if you're listening to this and you find yourself in a position like this, and it's not always a woman, sometimes it's the man. It just depends. Do your best to get yourself out of that situation, because nobody can do it but you. Nobody can do it for you. There's resources, there's law enforcement, and there's, depending on where you are, there's other resources in your community. You can reach out and ask for help and get an exit strategy, a plan in place to get out of there. The incident that I was involved in, the police were just taking a very long time to respond, and he was actively beating her and throwing her against a wall. I could hear her and her little, I think about a 5-year-old son, screaming and yelling. And I went down and knocked on the door finally, and he came to the door agitated, and then I got her out and sat her on the stairs along with the kid. And he ended up asking me, had I called the police? And I said, yeah, I do. I think everyone in here has called the police by now. It was very loud. Everyone could hear it. And it was clear you were injuring someone. And he made some threat on the way out. You better watch your back, rookie, or something like that, to me, because I called the cops, and then he fled the scene. And as it turns out, I've told this story before, but as it turns out, she did the right thing and got the heck out of Dodge. I think she left the state, but she got out of there almost immediately, took her son with her, and could not be reached as a victim / witness in the case when it came time to go to trial for this guy for the domestic violence. She was nowhere to be found, which is fine. I think it's whatever. If he gets off, whatever, at least she's not in danger anymore. But since they had no victim, they couldn't proceed with that. They actually charged him with witness intimidation for what he said to me on his way out. And I was able to go to court and testify. And he got quite a long time in jail, which was as happy ending as you can hope for. So, Abraham, if you had to go back and do this again, would you have done anything differently? And the answer can be no. That's fine.
I think I would have brought my trauma kit into my apartment first.
Okay, yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, because it's like John always talks about having your tools on your person, and it's like you never really take something, or at least most people never really take something like that into consideration until after the fact. But she's alive, and it wasn't the biggest hiccup, but I think maybe that's what I would have done different, only because as far as acting and getting involved and at least hopefully contributing to saving her life, I would do that. I would do that again.
Yeah, I think don't beat yourself up too much. We talk a lot about, especially law enforcement officers having, some sort of IFAC on their person at all times. Listen, you're just Abraham, the certified inpatient pharmacy tech. You're not, you're not the police. You're not the paramedics. And the fact that you had taken the time to educate yourself, to get some training on a tourniquet, to have a trauma kit. And most people don't have a trauma kit in the first place. And the fact that, you had it close by enough that you could make a difference, I think is great. I don't think if you're chilling in your place at 10 p.m., anyone expects you to have an IFAC on your ankle. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Realistically, I think you did the best you possibly could. And so this remains an unsolved mystery, which is just so maddening to me. Are there any lessons that you feel like you learned other than having the IFAC on you? Would you have gone maybe with a different firearm or without a firearm or anything else, or is that all pretty much what you would have done?
Yeah, surprisingly, I think that's all I would have done. You know, the as I mentioned before, the acronym that John always talks about, like, I don't know how, maybe it was just from me watching a video every single day. It is just locked into my head. And I'm the kind of person where, like, I need to have a plan. Otherwise, I could, at the worst, panic, or at the least, what they call paralysis of analysis.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, it really is. And so, the fact that I had that acronym in my head and knowing how to proceed with what I wanted to do, yeah, no, I feel like I done everything I needed to do. I armed myself just in case there was still a threat out there. I didn't see any accomplices, and you know, personally, I didn't have any partners, of course.
Right. No, absolutely.
Yeah. Now the injury, of course, was the first and foremost thing. After that, it was just kind of downhill from there. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I did what I could have done to the best of my ability.
Yeah, 100%. And we love John, Steph, Neil, everyone at Active Self Protection. We love to get that feedback. That's why we do what we do, is so that people will be prepared. And the fact that acronym was in your head and helped you to kind of sort things out and stay calm is great. I'll pass that along to John. I'll be talking to him later today. Abraham, I want to thank you so much for being prepared. I want to thank you for being in a mindset that helped your neighbor to survive a critical incident. I want to thank you for writing in. Again, folks, if you think your story isn't worth telling, we will never know unless you write to me and I look over it and we have a talk. So thanks for writing in. Thanks for being on the show. Without people like you, there wouldn't be a show. Thank you so much.
Appreciate you having me.
All right, gang, that is the end of the main interview. You know what time it is now? It is time for the Gutowski Files, now starring Stephen Gutowski. Stephen is the founder of TheReload.com and the host of the weekly Reload podcast. Stephen, aside from being completely beside yourself with excitement about the Eagles' NFC Championship victory and being in the Super Bowl, how else are you? Because I don't want to hear any more about it.
Yeah, well, I think we should spend the next 15 minutes talking about the Eagles being in the Super Bowl, because that's my main focus right now.
Don't let Correa hear that. John Correa is
life.
not a happy man. He is a diehard 49ers fan, and he was not pleased to see his team get kind of, well, frankly,
It's
humiliated.
31-7, so
Yeah, it wasn't good.
I was happy, if
Sure.
anyone's wondering. I was very happy about the whole situation. Very great. Pretty amazed that we managed to pull off the turnaround. 5 years, going from a Super Bowl winning coach and this top prospect quarterback, and then managing to pull off getting rid of both of them and hiring a new coach.
Pretty much a complete rebuild. Yeah, I like your coach. If he wants to come down to DC, he's welcome to come down to DC and sort us out.
We got real lucky with some of that. I mean, good work on the part of the front office, honestly.
Only downside of Coach Sirianni is every time they would say Sirianni on TV, it would activate my Siri on my iPhone, and I got a little irritating.
That's why you got to switch to Android, man.
So
then you only get it every 5 seconds when Google thinks you're talking to it.
Yes. Or there's an announcer or a coach named Boki Googleman, and it thinks that I'm or whatever. Anyway, condolences to the 49ers and Bengals fans. Sorry about that, but there's always next year. This week on the Gutowski Files, we are discussing...
Although, real quick, if anyone has Super Bowl tickets that they don't need, that just like they happen to have some, I would be willing to take them.
Very well.
So just so people know.
You heard it here, and you could stay with us or stay with Korea. He's right down the street.
There you go. I should stay with John. I should come to Arizona.
It's a nice
to go
house.
to the Eagles Super Bowl and stay at John's.
John's got a nice pad. He did comment that he was happy, at least the fact that he wouldn't blow $10,000 on Super Bowl tickets.
Do you think he could fly me over the stadium and parachute me in?
That's not a bad idea.
That's viable.
Yeah. Those of you who don't know, John is a licensed pilot. So we'll discuss that off air. I think that's something we want
I'd be
to talk
willing
about.
to try it. So just putting that out there, John.
Sure.
I'm down.
I'll mention it. This week we are talking about a couple of articles over at thereload.com, one by our friend Mr. Kotowski, one by contributing editor Jake Fogelman. Both articles have to do with the state of New Jersey, and both articles have to do with federal judges and recent decisions. But they're two different stories and two different cases, and one of those judges is special for a reason that Stephen will explain. Stephen, talk to us about what's going on in the Garden State.
Yeah, it's been a bad week for New Jersey legislators, at least. It's only Tuesday, too, when we're filming this. So two rulings against their gun laws in 2 days by different federal judges. The first one, just to sort of recap this, because we've actually talked about this whole concept quite a bit on the podcast to this point, because New York has done the exact same thing. These are Bruin response laws, right? These are passed after the landmark ruling in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association v. Bruin, where the restrictive gun carry laws in New York were struck down as being subjective and violating the Second Amendment. That, of course, affected other states that have those same sorts of laws, New Jersey being one of them. And the legislatures there did not like being told that they couldn't enact these sorts of restrictions. And so they have attempted to fire back, I guess, at the Supreme Court by passing a number of laws. And chief among them are these sensitive places restrictions that you've seen in New York and New Jersey, and you're likely to see very soon in Colorado and perhaps other blue states as well. Or sorry, not Colorado, California.
Right.
Although Colorado may also do it.
Right.
It's a little less certain. California is almost a given that they will pass. They tried to pass it last year and failed through emergency request, but they have enough votes to pass it in the normal way that you pass legislation. So what happened is on Monday, Judge Renee Bumb issued a temporary restraining order against New Jersey's sensitive places restrictions. This was a law that restricted where you could carry a gun. You can now get a permit to carry in New Jersey and New York and elsewhere, but the response has been to make it really difficult where you can actually carry your gun even with that permit. And so they put restrictions on so-called sensitive places, such as normal things like government buildings and schools, which are sort of more commonly restricted in other states and have been for a long time. And this is something that the Supreme Court said in Bruin, you can have some sensitive place restrictions, but what they were attempting to make clear is that it can't just be everywhere. Justice Thomas talked about how you can't just say the entire island of Manhattan is a sensitive place. But more or less, these legislatures have kind of ignored that advice. And so now you're seeing the fruits of that. But, so you can perhaps have restrictions in schools and government buildings, but some of these other places like theaters, restaurants, sporting arenas, parks, airports, childcare facilities, it's not as clear that you can do that. And that's what was struck down. And then in addition to those sort of specific places, you also had New York and now New Jersey trying to restrict carry on publicly accessible private property. So basically businesses, any sort of retail business that a person might carry a gun into. Traditionally, everywhere else in the country, right, up to this point, even in New York and New Jersey up till now, the rule was that you can carry on private property unless the owner posts a sign to make it clear that that's not allowed. In some states, this carries criminal charges if you violate the sign. In others, it's more like a trespassing charge if you don't leave, sort of thing. But now, New Jersey and New York have tried to flip that on its head and make it so that you cannot legally carry a gun onto any publicly accessible private property unless the owner posts a sign saying that you can.
Which is, can I just stop you right there? That I heard about this not too long ago from one of my friends in New York City, Long Island specifically, and that really does rub me the wrong way. They're saying, okay, you have to every business suddenly now has to be aware this law exists, to make an intelligent decision, which most of them probably don't. Most people outside of our community aren't following this stuff that closely. So that was just such a preposterous thing on its face, in my humble opinion, as a non-journalist, folks. I'm just commenting here. The idea that that's the way they set it up. It was clever. I'll hand them that. It was clever on their part. That way you just sort of take care of 99% of businesses who aren't going to know about this and therefore aren't going to put a sign up saying you can carry in our business.
Yeah, it's certainly novel, right? It's unique. It's something that hadn't been tried before. Although, if you remember the Bruin Standard, it's sort of inherently a problem because Bruin says that your gun laws have to be rooted in historical tradition in order to be constitutional. So the fact that nobody had tried this before, it's kind of an automatic strike against these laws. And that's basically what this judge has found in this case. And so these restrictions are now on hold. New Jersey can't enforce them, including the private property one. And so that's very similar to what happened in New York with the federal judges in that state, or that, oversee that state, ruled against New York's laws as well. And so now New Jersey's law, which came a little bit later than New York's, is in the same boat. But you also saw another law, and perhaps maybe an even more interesting judge, because Bum was appointed by George W. Bush. This other judge that ruled against New Jersey's, they have a law that seeks to allow people to sue gun makers and dealers over the way they market firearms, trying to sidestep the Federal Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act that says you can't sue gun companies for the criminal acts of third parties. So basically, if somebody uses a Glock to kill someone or shoot somebody illegally, you can't sue Glock over that.
In the same way that you couldn't sue Ford or Chevy for someone running you over, or sue Ginsu or Cutco for someone stabbing you. Right. They're misusing the product.
Yes, same idea. Same basic concept of, like, you can still sue gun companies if they produce, for instance, a defective product. That still happens actually all the time. You've seen some major lawsuits against, for instance, SIG over the 320s drop safety issues, or Remington over the Remington 700s trigger issues. That you've seen lawsuits over these sorts of things that aren't precluded by the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act. But what New Jersey was trying to do was create a new cause of action for gun companies being a, quote, public nuisance over how they market their guns or sell their guns. And so the gun industry, or at least a trade group, the National Shooting Sports Foundation, which is the group that puts on SHOT Show every year and includes all the major manufacturers and dealers of guns, they sued New Jersey over this, saying that it's in violation, direct contrast to the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act. And Judge Zahid Qureshi, I apologize if I've mispronounced it, this judge's name, but he's actually a Biden appointee. He ruled in favor of NSSF. He ruled that this New Jersey law is trying to allow lawsuits over things that are prevented by the federal law. So it's in conflict. And in those situations where state law and a federal law are in conflict, the federal law is supreme. There's the whole supremacy clause of the Constitution.
Unless you're in Colorado.
There's obviously maybe still some controversy over, usually the federal government can't use local resources to enforce federal law. They can't require that necessarily. And so there's been issues over that, but you can't do what would be called nullification, right? This was a sort of something that was a big deal during the lead up to the Civil War, right? The nullification. But either way, the federal judge here found against New Jersey and its law that sought to encourage lawsuits against gun makers.
Very good. Well, those things are both very good news in my opinion. And I do have one question for you before we end this segment. You may not be able to answer this. I don't know. Is it possible that some judges, they're looking at the kind of the tea leaves, they're writing on the wall, as it were, and not wanting their decisions to be, reviewed by the Supreme Court or by the appellate courts, and they just go, well, this is obviously how this is going to end up, so I'm just going to rule for example, post Bruin, I'm going to rule in alignment with what Bruin has said. Therefore, I'm not going to have to worry about this thing getting second guessed. Is that something that happens, do you think?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
I think that is something that happens. I don't think lower court judges want to be overruled. And if they don't see any sort of flexibility in the precedent that was set by the Supreme Court or even by just a higher court in their district, they will not try to, most of the time, will not try to go against that.
Right.
In fact, this judge, to be clear, like this isn't even a Second Amendment case necessarily. This doesn't rely on Bruin for its analysis.
Talking about the suing the gun maker, that ruling.
Yeah, right. This case that is about it's actually more about the conflict between federal law and state law, because Congress has already addressed this issue of whether you can sue gun makers for just general gun crime, and Congress said no, you can't. You can sue gun makers if they do something illegal, like if they illegally sold guns to people, right? If Glock was selling guns out of the back of the factory to criminals, then yeah, you could go after them and sue them over the damage caused by that. Or if they were, making false claims in their advertising, like any other business, they're committing some sort of fraud, you could sue them over that. If Smith & Wesson sells you a defective gun and it goes off when it's not intended to and injures you, you can sue them over that. And that is, as I mentioned, those things do happen.
Yeah.
Those sorts of suits do occur. So it's not as though, sometimes you get media outlets or advocates claiming that this is sort of a total liability protection law, and it's not true. I think even the president has actually claimed this. He claimed there was, no other industries get this sort of liability protection, and that's just not true. It's important to understand what the federal law actually does and what they're trying to do to get around it. This has been an ongoing fight for 30 plus years. There was, before the PLCIA, which passed in 2004 during the W. Bush administration, there had been a concerted effort to file essentially frivolous lawsuits on these grounds that you had mayors, you had a lot of cities were trying to sue gun makers over claims that they should be held liable for guns being, the guns they make being recovered at crime scenes. And these were often thrown out, or they were always thrown out. Essentially, they never won on those cases, but the idea wasn't necessarily to win the case. It was to tie up the gun companies in court and make them have to fight these frivolous suits
and expend resources, spend money.
Exactly. And so the law was created to stop that whole phenomenon, because Congress believed these were intentionally frivolous and they were intended to, the way that I just described. And so that's why they passed this law, to make it even easier to get these sorts of cases tossed out. Now, people probably remember that Remington recently settled with the Sandy Hook families, or some of the Sandy Hook families. Right. Or I should say Remington's insurers, the insurers of the now defunct Remington Arms Company. So Remington went bankrupt during this lawsuit over really over unrelated reasons. They had a lot of issues with the company and the guns, and they had made a lot of mistakes business wise. But and I'm sure the lawsuit may have had some impact on the bankruptcy filing as well. It did, they went on further than people expected it to because of the PLCAA. There was sort of a novel claim in there about advertising, and how the advertising of the Bushmaster rifle that ended up being used in the Sandy Hook shooting was somehow responsible for what had happened. And this never actually got to the merits of the case, but it got far enough. It wasn't immediately thrown out. They sort of allowed the Massachusetts, or I can't recall if it was Massachusetts or Connecticut, but the state Supreme Court said, you can go through with this challenge. You can at least make this claim. And they're not state. In fact, I believe they said it would be hard to prove on the merits, but the big legal ruling in that case that let it get to the point where a settlement happened was that the court threw out most of the claims, because they had other claims, like they claimed that the AR-15 shouldn't be sold to civilians because it's a military weapon, and
right.
It's irresponsible of the company to entrust it to civilians. And, the claims like that, your more traditional sort of what you hear from gun control advocate type claims. But those got tossed, and instead it was this claim over irresponsible marketing towards unstable young men, was somehow supposed to be responsible for what happened at Sandy Hook, even though there was no evidence that the shooter had seen the marketing, and he wasn't actually the one who bought the gun. His mother bought the gun, and he murdered his mother to take the gun. Just to give you some insight into that case. But it did end up settling because it was allowed to move forward procedurally. It never got to the point where there was a ruling on the merits of the claim, or the test against the PLCAA at that point. But the insurers were dealing with potential liability of that, and the company didn't exist anymore to say, we're going to keep fighting this. So they settled, and this created a lot of momentum for these sorts of lawsuits, and to pass laws to try and take advantage of this sort of marketing loophole idea. Marketing, as a form of, you pass a state law that says you can't market guns in a certain way, and if the company violates that state law, then it's not protected by the PLCAA. That's the concept behind what they're trying to do. And now this federal judge has said that doesn't work. You're clearly just violating these legal protections from the federal law, and so it can't stand. He also, interestingly, even though this didn't have to do with Bruin, he does at one point suggest that there might actually be even more problems with this law beyond what he's ruled on. He says, quote, "The court additionally has concerns as to whether this New Jersey law can survive on constitutional grounds. However, because the court finds NSSF is likely to succeed on the merits of its preemption argument, the argument over the federal law, the court need not address the constitutional issues at this time." So he's sort of also implying that this probably wouldn't withstand the Bruin test as well, but it didn't even get to that point because it was already in conflict with the federal law.
That is our time, folks. Do me a favor right now. As soon as you're done listening to this, head on over to thereload.com. That's thereload.com. And have a look. If you haven't already, consider getting a membership. Stephen does depend on his membership dues to fund his important work. He does not have a day job. This is all that he does, and now he has employees, plural. You have a new writer over there, or a newer writer, it looks like. I saw a new face on the website.
We have a couple contributors every so often outside of me and Jake. So
okay.
I'm hoping to expand in the coming year if we can get membership up, and hopefully open up some new lines of revenue, perhaps. I think we could do a lot more. Sure. We're limited in what we can do right now with the resources we have, but hopefully that'll change as we continue to grow.
Kind of like this. I don't think anyone else is doing what we're doing here at the Ask Podcast. Not exactly anyway. And I don't know of any other organization. There's gun rights groups that have newsletters, you know what I mean? But I don't know of any other actual media source who's doing what the Reload is doing. So it's important that we keep him not just afloat, but get enough membership dues in there that he can start to grow, hire more people, and expand. You can also catch Stephen occasionally on CNN as their resident expert on gun-related things. Unfortunately, they kind of only call him when there's a crisis or an emergency. So hopefully we'll get more of him talking about general firearm stuff and not just mass shootings.
They've been pretty good. I've had a very good relationship with them so far, and as that keeps maturing too, I hope to spend even more time on CNN's air. I've been very happy thus far.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said before, for those of you who don't like CNN or those other networks that aren't 100% pro 2A or whatever, understand that they're there, and we might as well have somebody, a voice of reason, who is pro 2A on there discussing these issues and educating folks who otherwise wouldn't hear the voice of reason as it comes to this stuff. So I'm stoked that he's over there. Stephen, once again, thank you for being here, and I'll see you next week.
Absolutely.
Hey friends, this is John Correa. If you like the podcast, if it is bringing you value, do me a favor and leave us a rating and a review. It really helps us out.